have to have legal support. You have to have economic support. And ultimately, these terrorists are going to be crushed by domestic pressures in each of the countries that cut off their support, and that's what we want to encourage.
You mentioned Osama bin Laden. He's not the only one that people would probably classify, even through the intelligence community, as a terrorist. Do we have any idea worldwide the number of cells, the number of networks of terrorists at all?
Well, we know there's an interlocking network, and Osama bin Laden is one among several. He's, in many cases, considered the chief financial backer and perhaps the overall coordinator. He may or may not have been the lead planner in this operation.
Yeah, and that
but there
been...
are more than 24 countries in which there are cells. There are any number of cells in these countries, and maybe 50,000 people or more have gone through various militant Islamic training centers.
50,000?
Maybe that many. They fought in Afghanistan. They fought in various places during the operations in the Balkans. There were some who came into Bosnia. Some married. Some were still there in Bosnia. We knew when we were trying to work in Kosovo that there were continued charges of radical Islamic fighters in Kosovo. We couldn't find much evidence of that, but they're in many different places in many cells around the world.
You trained leaders and soldiers for 5 years. A lot of them went to Desert Storm. Is the United States trained to fight a war against terrorists?
We've got the best armed forces in the world. It's not just an armed forces action, though. Primarily, it's a police action
and intelligence
action first. We've got great special operations forces if we have to go in and do something precise. We've got high technology, the most highly trained and disciplined, greatest soldiers and airmen involved that anybody has in the world. And we've got large conventional forces to back it up.
Evelyn is on the phone with us from California. Thank you for hanging on, Evelyn. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just calling in response to your question on whether or not you feel the U.S. should retaliate. And I feel that most of the United States, as much as we fear retaliation and what it might do to us, that we feel as a nation that we need to retaliate.
There is that thought, right, that we must retaliate, that the United States must retaliate or it would look weak, but then there are those who worry that it could spiral out of control, that it will get into this endless cycle of violence. What do you think about that,
We
General
have to
Clark?
keep in mind the long-term objective. The long-term objective is to go after the terrorist networks, to deprive them of support, to eliminate these individuals one way or another. Ideally, bring them to justice, put them on trial, convict them of their crimes, and take whatever measures justice. If they resist arrest or detention, then we'll use other means on them. But the idea is to focus on the long term and then take the steps necessary one by one to get there. What we want to do is be as precise as possible so we get at the threat. What we don't want to do is turn this campaign into something it doesn't have to be. This is not World War II. We don't have an enemy nation.
Could it come to that, though? Could it come to that? Or is the support so widespread for the United States, even now at this beginning, that the support would be great enough that it could be taken care of in a fairly rapid fashion?
We have the moral high ground. Our actions have to reinforce our morality, our compliance with international law, and our superior intelligence.
Don't you think a lot of folks worry about if it could get into a protracted battle and if it could go on and on if we were to get into a battle?
Well, I think people are very concerned about this, and it's a strange feeling in the American public. I've had a lot of people say we must retaliate, but then right after that they say, but we're worried about what happens next. And I think what we have to recognize is to win, and we have to win this because our nation and our way of life are at stake. We have to succeed. But to succeed, we have to do it in a smart fashion. We have to think of the long term, and we have to prepare ourselves for a campaign, not a single strike, not two strikes, but something that is going to last months and perhaps years to defeat this if we do this the right way.
Much of the same that I hear on those 2 points, too. Must retaliate, but worried as well. Jim, you're on the phone from Texas with us. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Hi, go right ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
I'd like to address a point that you made just a minute ago about the on and on thing that's going on. You know, people are worried about the violence that could continue on and on.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's been going on for a long time anyway. We've always been under the threat of this, and even though the public doesn't hear about it, there's a lot of attacks that have been thwarted that people just don't hear about, and so the battle's been going on anyway. And people are concerned about that continuing on if we retaliate. Well, that's going to happen anyway.
All right.
Even if we don't retaliate, it's still going to continue on, and so we have to.
Jim, I think you're exactly right on that. I just don't label it retaliation. I label it part of another campaign. But I think we also have to recognize that even though this attack, or this wave of attacks seems to be over, we fully expect that there are other efforts underway or being planned against us. So we have to move forward and take action to disrupt this.
But a word you've mentioned over and over, have to do it smartly. Let's bring in our Major Garrett. He is at the White House, and he is privy to some of the information that's coming out of there, certainly, and what they're trying to look at and put plans together. Major?
Well, Donna, as you've been discussing, the president is reviewing all available options. As the Secretary of State has pointed out, this is multidimensional. Military is certainly at the top of the list of the various options the president and his national security team are exploring. But there's also diplomatic, economic means of trying to tighten the noose around terrorist cells around the world. All of those options are being discussed. The president will continue throughout the weekend to have intensive discussions with his national security team to look at all of these options. He is now armed, if you will, with the legislative will of the Congress to prosecute a war against those responsible for the abominable terrorist acts on September 11th. Armed with that and the very strong unified will of the American people and the unity expressed across the globe, the president is well positioned to prosecute this war. And as General Clark pointed out, we have the moral high ground, the moral authority to carry out this war. It will be protracted in many respects, experts believe, and also, as the Secretary of State outlined, multidimensional. So it's not just about a military response, be it very swift or down the road. Military is clearly a component of that, but also diplomatic, economic means of isolating, tightening a noose, and in some ways, whether it be swiftly or in a more protracted way, completely isolating to the point of nullity these terrorist cells.
Major Garrett at the White House, thanks very much. And of course, that use of force resolution says all necessary and appropriate force. What do you think is necessary and appropriate? What would you say, and how long do you think it could be? Sooner rather than later, before a response would come?
Well, it will depend on a lot of information that really isn't available to us in the public. But we do think that we have a very active target development process, and we need to use the right force to disrupt his operations. Whether that's an insertion of a raid, whether it's cruise missiles or long-range air, or whether it's the police cracking down on a terrorist cell in some city overseas. Those are, we need a grand campaign plan that puts that first response, but we don't have time to spare. We need to be moving just as we are.
What do you mean by that? Why don't we have time to spare? Because they're on the move?
That's right. And an organization that's this effective and this complex has more than one play in its playbook. And there's something else that's being rehearsed or prepared or maybe staged to go against us now. So we want to take as rapid action as possible, but we want to be effective and we want to have the support of our allies. And I think what the congressional resolution does is authorize the president to do precisely that without tying his hands. So whether it's with high-performance aircraft or cruise missiles or our soldiers or policemen in another country that we have to support, whatever it is, that's what we've got the authorization to do, I think.
Ground campaign with this, in your opinion?
Well, perhaps eventually, but I don't see a ground campaign in the offing. There's no country. We're not invading a country here, and there's been a lot of talk about Afghanistan, but, I mean, frankly, no one has wanted to invade Afghanistan and hold it for any reasons other than what we saw the Russians try to do in the 1980s. They weren't very successful. We probably could be, but why do we want to be? That's their own country. What we want to do is get rid of the terrorist network.
And the High Holy Leader said that Osama bin Laden would not have been able to do this, couldn't train there, he's already moved, and some of the aid workers are pulling out now, and in some concern to a lot of folks, and a lot of innocent people face starvation and attacks, and the people who had money could get out, but others are stuck there. Let's go on to David. Is that right, David in Chicago? Thank you. Hi, David, you're on the air.
Hello, how you doing?
Good. Hope you're the same.
Thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
I believe the U.S. must and should retaliate, especially the way General Clark just explained it. It has to be targeted, strategic. It can't be just one big thing sending tons of troops down to Afghanistan, trying to take over the country, or different places trying to hunt the main person down. And then, because that way you're going to get a lot of innocent people that maybe are good people. They're just poor. They're under the influence of the not the dictatorship, but the people are running Afghanistan right now.
Taliban, that's right. What about that, General Clark?
Well, I think
is
that's right.
Afghanistan looked at this point as sticking out? Pakistan said it wanted to think about the options about, the United States going to General Musharraf and taking a look at this and saying, okay, what's your cooperation factor here? As I heard earlier this evening, Pakistan has decided that it will cooperate with the United States. But does this mean
Afghanistan hasn't yet, because the Taliban are very dependent on the Mujahideen that came there during the war against the Russians and are still there in a large community of Arab fighters in fighting their own civil war. But perhaps the Taliban needs to recalculate, because
how likely are they to do that?
I don't know. It depends on what connections we may get.
Because Osama bin Laden has been there apparently for a couple of years.
He's been there,
at least.
and he's heavily supported, but also there are connections between Pakistan and the Taliban. And if General Musharraf really supports us the way he says he does, maybe he's going to pull connections. My point would be, we're not interested in Afghanistan per se. We're interested in smashing a terrorist network. And it just so happens that we believe that part of that terrorist network, or perhaps the hub of it, may be located there. But it's not a matter of attacking airfields or factories or facilities. It's a matter of individuals. Those individuals need to be identified, tracked, detained, and turned over to the United States and the world community for justice. That's what the Taliban needs to do if they truly believe in God and the professions of morality, which the mainstream of Islam does.
Could they face other pressure from other Middle Eastern countries? Could they make some headway in talking to the Taliban?
Well, perhaps they could, and that's certainly one of the courses of action that I think General Powell has outlined, our diplomatic approach.
Yeah, and at the State Department today, before that national prayer service, there was quite a showing of support as they headed on buses to go and signing condolence books. And as they headed to that prayer service, a couple of the diplomats that I saw on Wire reports said that maybe the United States doesn't realize just how strong the worldwide support is at this point. Let's go for a little perspective to our Garrick Utley. He's in New York. Hi, Garrick.
Hi, Donna. I think every conversation, particularly important conversations, very emotional ones about our future, such as this, may have a place for a devil's advocate. So let me just raise a couple of points. It's clear, as we've all been seeing, there's a great need and desire for some kind of action to be taken. A moment ago, you showed the very interesting results of the CNN Time poll, which shows that 62% say it thought that Congress should declare war. Clearly understood the reasons for that. But the next question on the poll: who should Congress declare war against? Answer, 61% saying, we don't know. And I think there in this poll that was taken, the CNN Time poll, we see the confusion, the uncertainty that lurks there sort of as a subtext along with this desire to take action. And the other comment I would make is simply that I think we all know that this word war has been diluted. We've had all kinds of war on drugs, a war on poverty, and now it's going to be war on terrorism. A new war, that's what we're calling a new war. Now, Donna, military action, I think, is going to be coming clearly. If we get lucky and if we're smart, as the general says, we're going to maybe send in some cruise missiles or other kinds of airstrikes if we know where bin Laden is or his associates are. But it's also going to be necessary, and we have to keep this in mind, to satisfy the public demand for action. And this puts a leader, the President of the United States, in a very difficult position. He only wants to act smartly when he knows he can accomplish something. At the same time, he has to satisfy what we saw today when he was visiting those rescue workers in New York chanting USA, USA, USA. Well, something will certainly happen in the coming weeks or the coming months, but I suspect in the long run, I'd like to hear the General's comments on this, that what this may turn out to be is very similar to the war on drugs. If you listen to what General Clark has been saying, the language he's been using, which is very well spoken, it's similar to the language that's been used on the war on drugs for many years. We got to get in and get those networks. We're not fighting countries. We got to get good intelligence information. We got to get hold of their leaders. From time to time we succeed. A drug cartel kingpin like Pablo Escobar is removed from the scene. But the war on drugs goes on and on and